So, I have had some really smart friends in my time in this life, and really two main teachers that taught me how to think. And I had some good teachers, like in school. I had a good history teacher, a good Spanish teacher. So those that Spanish and history teacher, and English, and a couple others in high school, um, sure taught me how to think. And but these two people in my adult life taught me how to think really well, and how to be a critical thinker, and incorporated and shared with me ideas that I absorbed, and I should have absorbed more, and I should read more, and so much more. But those things haven't been lost on me, the things they taught me. One of the things that um, one of my living teachers taught me was about how we think in metaphor. And so I was thinking about a recent scenario I was in where a relationship ended, and thinking that person gave me an opportunity to sink or swim. So where at first I was sad about the relationship ending, then I was saying, aha, maybe it was necessary, maybe it's for the best. And then now coming to the conclusion of more like, maybe it was a godsend, not because that person was not appropriate for me, but because that the having the relationship and then the loss of it was a necessary set of actions that was needed to wake me up, to show me my wounds, and to heal me, and to give me an opportunity to heal. So to me, what an amazing insight. And it's not like I hadn't thought of that, but as I examined that a little more closely today, I said, wow, isn't this neat how these situations can come along and seemingly have an agenda of their own. You think, oh, cool, I've got a lover, a girlfriend. And then you lose them and say, no, I want them back. Come back. And then you realize, wait a second, look at all the magic that's occurred, or look at all the pain that's occurred as a result of these losses. Look at how much I've learned about myself, and look at how much that person has maybe done some firsts in their life, saying no or what have you, that they needed. And then you think, man, wait a second, this was, not only was this appropriate, but it was so necessary. And it would appear that it was the work of the universe, or almighty, or powerful, or gods, or guides, or what have you, in order to right the ships of these two individuals. And that was far more important, seemingly, than whether those two individuals had a lover in that moment, or whether those two individuals were, at that time, or one day would be, appropriate mates for the other. And that the universe apparently used those people in each other's lives to be catalysts for major and dramatic and needed change. And for me, they were a catalyst for change that I refused to make for the first 49 years of my life, despite knowing that some of those changes were needed. So if you just stop there and say, whoa, then that relationship, romantic relationship, seems inconsequential compared to the heavy lifting that it did in my life, the cracking open of Humpty Dumpty that was needed. And so it was in looking at that and saying, wow, that's really profound. Thanks, universe, for setting up all this sequence of events in order to crack me open so that I could grow and become and learn and see and feel and empathize for those who are going through what I went through, and to see previous mistakes where I hurt someone, and then to say, this is how it feels to lose someone. Now I understand. And so all the karma, all the everything, all the richness of it, accountability, and on and on and on. So, but the greater insight, more than that spiritual insight that's there, or the one I want to talk about more today, is this idea that we think in metaphors. And not just to say it and proclaim it, okay, we think in metaphors, great. That's not the salient point. it's a true statement that I think you'd find if you look it up, it would bear out that we tend to visualize. And so when you think in, like, I've been to the mountaintop, you think in that metaphor, okay, you're going up for information, or any number of different metaphors, similes, like and as. It's like this. So, when you have some problem, you say, it's like fixing your car. You got to diagnose it, and you got to whatever. It's like going to the hospital. So you can always say it's like something and say, aha, now through that metaphor, do I better understand the situation I'm in? Or you can better portray your philosophical point to me because you used a metaphor to describe it. And so the only problem, or the thing I want to speak up about today, isn't that we think in metaphors, which is just a true statement. It's just what we do. And somebody else can do a better job of proving it than I just did. But that in that we do think in metaphors, the metaphor can be the limiting factor in our thinking, in our decision making, and in our perception, and in our capacity to make sense of what's going on in the world. So the metaphor I was using was that when that relationship ended, that person did me the favor that I didn't see as a favor of letting me sink or swim instead of offering me comfort, which I would have wanted, some amount of connection. Okay, let's still be friends, let's talk. And that warmth would have been welcome. But it might not have been what I needed. So I said, well, this person allowed me to sink or swim in order to heal on my own power. And so I used sink or swim to be a metaphor for if I sank, I would not survive or not do well or not heal or not become more. And then if I swam, that I would be fending for myself and thusly become a more self-actualized human being. But the metaphor is faulty, and every metaphor is faulty is my point. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't use them, but we should recognize their limitations and their faults, because they can either be used to mislead us because of these faults, or you might say that's a false dichotomy, or somebody might use an inappropriate metaphor for a situation where they're trying to convince you that they're on your side, or that you should do this, or that this policy is good. You could compare a President Trump to a President Nixon and draw wrong conclusions about some of it. So isn't that the devil's in the details? And so is it with the metaphors that we use. We can say, aha, yay, we think in metaphors, so let's think in metaphors. But then when someone uses them in argumentation, you can say, yes, John, that's a good point. But the difference between the metaphor that you're using and this is that that's outdated. We like saying, here's a good one, or at least a comparison that can be misleading. You can say, well, we have a Second Amendment. The founders wanted us to have guns. And so thusly, an originalist reading of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is appropriate. But then you look back and say, well, these guys were using muskets. So now we're using AK-47s and things that shoulder-mounted, missiles. The technology has skewed the reality so much that using the founders and their intentions as a descriptor of and the deciding factor of what we should do about gun control or gun violence in America is not an apt comparison. And it may not be a metaphor, but that the clunkiness of the muskets versus now shows you the limitation of any argumentation you can make. So, while one should honor what the Constitution said and what the Bill of Rights says and what these people meant back then, we must also keep the document living instead of merely originalist and say, wait a second, there's nuance here, there's context here, things have changed, so we must adapt to our current realities instead of having a dead document that's just based on what the founders meant. Because what about in 10,000 years? What if a gun can zap people and kill 10,000 people with one button or with a thought, then we've gone so far so as to have lost the narrative. And so is it with our metaphors when we, so my sink or swim, my point was saying this person said, hey, sink or swim, which was a good metaphor for the situation I was in, where I had to find a way to self-soothe. Self-soothing would have been swimming, and not self-soothing and reaching for another person or whatever, an addiction or what have you, would have been sinking. But then when I thought about that, I said, well, yes, that's what I meant. That's the intention. I think that might have been that person's intention. This is the best thing for this person. I'm going to give them this gift of figuring out self-reliance. But sinking and swimming has a limitation, because we tend to think of the swimming as good or sinking as bad. And just like in spirituality with religion, Christianity would say, hey, the devil's down and God is up. But it doesn't work like that, necessarily. Native Americans think the earth is the earth mother, the divine mother, Pachamama. So just because one frame of reference has down being bad doesn't make it so. And it's the same with sinking and swimming. I get what I was trying to say with it. But when I thought about it, when I'm having trouble, the troubles that I've been having since that breakup and trying to grow and heal and maybe being in a rush and a hurry to heal and glow up and be my best self and look good and be different and perform for either the person that was in the relationship with me or everybody on Facebook or my friends and family or whomever, was the sense that I needed to swim and not sink. And what I've been experiencing instead is more and more sinking. And so one might say, no, that means that you're going in the wrong direction. But that's because the metaphor was clunky to begin with. It served its purpose in my initial thinking to say, aha, that was the offer this person presented me. Get by on your own means. But sink or swim is just too two-dimensional to portray that. So instead of throwing it out with the bathwater and saying, oh, let's find another metaphor for it, we can say, wait a second. Let's three-dimensionalize that metaphor. Let's bring it to life and say, wait a second, maybe some sinking is due. Because maybe the wounds and the core beliefs that need to be challenged and the uncharted areas and parts of me and the inner child or what have you and the traumas are down in the water. And so while eventually you want to swim, perhaps for a while you do need to sink. So we don't have to reject the idea and say, well, that's a faulty metaphor. We just have to use the metaphor for what it's maybe trying to tell us on other levels. And the other levels are when you sink and you get scared because you're not swimming, you're not floating, you're not rising up to the top. Maybe it's because there's more work to do and that the only way to get there is to sink. And that's when we become alive, when we say, aha, wait a minute. We do think in metaphors, but we can't let the metaphors and limitations give us this false sense that down is bad and up is good. And God is up in heaven and the devil's in the ground. Because that's just one distorted way of looking at it. Let us not use metaphor to distort our capacity to perceive reality and to distort our capacity to do the work. So I've been like, shit, man, I'm not rising up. It's been months. Why am I sinking? And I'm sure some people sink and their life gets bad or their life ends or what have you. They get sick, they die, they get addicted, they lose everything, whatever it is. But in my case, I can look at it and say, I'm sinking to get down to that core belief or to get down to that core wound. And in my haste to want to perform my swim and my glow up and my victory and my being appropriate to that person or some person someday as a lover, I've got to say, wait a second, maybe this might be years of work. This excavation might be absolutely painstaking when everyone is selling a 90-day transformation plan on social media and such. And so in the same breath, you can say, wait a second, it is good to believe that you can have a miracle or an instant miracle or manifest quickly. Yeah, I don't want to be the guy that's selling this has to take 20 years of therapy or something like that. But allowing for both. I could, like right now in real estate, I suddenly have, two super high-end listings for me. One over $1 million and one just over $250,000. And a couple of other listings, and a lot going on in a time where others are struggling. So whether I manifested that or whether that happened by luck or by fate or by the market forces, any of the above, that is pretty instant. It's pretty quick. Last year was terrible and this year's better. And I know people that have made dramatic changes in a certain period of time. I noticed that I had made a pretty dramatic change recently where I had 90 days of change under my belt. And so we should believe in the potential for instantaneous or almost instantaneous change when we change our beliefs, when we're willing to challenge core beliefs or others' perceptions about us or what have you. But we don't need to be in such a rush to swim that we aren't willing to sink a little bit and see what's down there. Because if we follow that metaphor, we might find that there are places in our life, in our mind, in our soul that we've never explored because we were too afraid. We just don't even know they exist. We've been acting like everything's fine or just keep going and muscle through for decades, for me, 50 years. And I might have talked a good ballgame about trauma and families of origin and previous relationships and accountability and all sorts of things and inner children and stuff. But we kind of don't really know. And so I want to look at these attachment wounds and core wounds and attachment styles as ways in which we plaster over pain and suffering and misunderstanding and loss and abandonment and neglect and abuse. And then if we ever hurt anybody in our lives, we gotta paper over that too. And then we realize, oh my gosh, hurt people. And then so you look around at a society where everybody's so hurt and screwed up that they're just sitting on a pile of skeletons in the closet and wondering why they can't make it work with a new person when they're trying to create a scenario that they recognize from their childhood or from an earlier relationship. So we do sometimes give each other a real gift when we go away so that the person can say, this might be a good opportunity to finally clean out this closet. And again, the skeleton in the closet, that's a metaphor. You could sit here and say, Jason, there's reasons why that isn't apt. But it's only so good as it helps you to see and articulate something that you weren't able to do that with, and to imagine a more clear picture of life and of your circumstances and troubles and problems and potentials than before the metaphor. But it doesn't mean it stops with that metaphor. The skeletons in the closet metaphor has its limitations, and then it can be broadened or connected to the sink or swim, and you can piece these together, but you have to look at them with a critical lens and say, this is only a provisional scaffolding upon which I'm choosing to place my thinking and perception in order that I might better understand this incomprehensible world that I live in. It's an interface. The metaphor is an interface for something almost like our eyes show us what our hands and we touch this and it's real. Like, this is just an interface with a reality that we don't necessarily understand. So while we say don't believe your eyes, don't believe your metaphors. Don't believe the things you think about, you little bunny rabbit. Don't believe the things you think about the life you're living and the people involved in your life, because it's just very provisional. And maybe that's the 10-second elevator speech about metaphor that I could have done so much more quickly. I got that idea of things being provisional from Terence McKenna, and he made great points about that. So here we are on this planet. We don't know what's going on. We don't know why we keep getting into the same problems or have health issues or family issues or friend issues or relationship issues or developmental issues or whatever they are. And we've got to just realize that our capacity to perceive is really the cobbling together of these provisional items that don't really tell the truth about what is going on. They just help us get an approximation. And so when we're thinking and using metaphor, be thankful for the approximation. And you don't have to reject it because it is approximate or faulty or limited or skewed or two-dimensional. You just have to recognize that it is. And then within that, like I was doing, I was saying, let's play with it. Let's play with that metaphor. Yeah, of course we want to swim because we have lungs and we need to breathe the air. So you do eventually have to pop up and swim. And you might stop doing the work that day and pop up and swim and watch a TV show or go out with friends or do whatever you do so that you aren't doing the work. So you're breathing. And you take a big old gulp of air and go back down again and excavate core wounds and attachment issues and faulty beliefs, negative attitudes and perceptions about self and all the above, and go back. So the thinking is as important as the swimming. And then when you can flesh out that metaphor, then it suddenly makes sense to you. And it's suddenly useful to you. And it's not just up good, down bad. Because so much of our culture is becoming about black and whites and fallacies and this group's the bad group, the in group, the out group, and I'm the good guys. And that's not helping us think. That's not helping us keep our hearts open to each other. And so, yes, it was in gratitude for this person that was in my life that woke me up so recently. But it was really in gratitude for the person who was talking to me about how we think in metaphors that made me realize that she, when she told me that, like lit up a whole corner of my mind. Hey, little baby. I know. And I'm really thankful for that too. And the person who, the other friend who taught me about fallacies and so much more, I really miss them. And I'm really thankful that they took this time to plant these seeds in me. And those seeds have made it so that I have an intellect that really works and can see past stuff. And they can impart this type of information. Hopefully it's useful to people so we can kind of light each other's candle a little bit, because sometimes somebody just gives you a hug when you need it and it makes your heart feel loved, and that's a great feeling. But also is it when somebody lights your intellectual candle and shows you that now you have a name for a feeling you never knew you were experiencing. Like a friend of mine, some months back, I remember saying catastrophizing, and I looked over and I saw their face light up, like, oh. And then they knew that there was a thing that they did and that they could do and that we do that is a distortion of events into thinking that everything is a catastrophe, and that just suddenly they were armed with this shield that was catastrophizing. And I was like, oh, I love those moments. And gosh, I'm talking about how people did that for me. And we can keep doing that for each other. So hopefully that's the point of these videos, isn't that I teach you what the truth is about the Trump administration or about our history or about our social endeavor and our culture, but that I show you that there are errors in judgment and thinking that are slippery, and that to kind of go there with me for a little while will show you that you have the capacity to morning, to expand your perception and realize the many ways that the culture has two-dimensionalized your capacity to think, and that all you need to do is to be willing to reinflate those ideas and those capacities. Again, another metaphor, to inflate. Now you can imagine this thing going from 2D to 3D. Doesn't matter if it goes the whole distance. So hopefully that's useful. Hopefully you can realize that we think in metaphor, or you can go chase it down and see if I'm telling the truth or whether that makes sense, and have that be a whole new endeavor into having the capacity to make sense out of life, having a new critical thinking skill or two. Or maybe I brought 2 or 3 of them up here that will make it so that you perceive better and that you don't get hoodwinked so easily. You don't trick yourself into dehumanizing somebody. You find a way to be grateful for what really happened and how much it could have been a gift, and that you realize that we take so much for granted. We believe what we see visually. But if we use vision as the metaphor, we believe what we think, because to think of something is just like to see something. I'm walking by this car right now and I can reach out and touch it. So I take in that I keep getting picked up by the being able to reach out and touch it. It makes me believe everything I see. And the same thing with everything we think. We can assume it's so solid, but our eyes can actually fool us. Witnesses in a murder case, 10 witnesses might all describe a different scene or a different set of actions. Or you can see an event and not understand what it is. Some argue that the Native Americans in that they'd never seen a ship as it came across the shore with the Spaniards, that they might not have even seen it because their mind had no capacity, had no metaphor for this. So if we're willing to doubt our thoughts, it's just as important as being willing to doubt what we see with our own eyes, because our eyes can deceive us. I can think of tons of times where I thought a person far away was someone else, or I thought something on the ground was an animal and it was a bag or a box. So if my eyes can deceive me, so can my thoughts. And if your thoughts can deceive you, so can you be propagandized, and so can you be misled, so can you be tricked and fooled and hoodwinked and made to join a cult, or made to think things about someone that aren't true, or to blame or scapegoat. So we're also vulnerable to the tricks of our own minds and other people's minds, that we need to at least see the means by which it happens and take advantage of those and say, aha, I'm going to use this now for me. I'm going to see how these metaphors can help me in my self-discovery, as opposed to help this person sell me a product or trick me into liking or hating somebody. Whew, that was a lot. Have a great day, everybody.